came here to build the new Chicano movement. That's what we came here for. We came here to build the new Chicano movement. That's what we came here for.
Hey everyone, it's Miguel Garcia, and we're finally back. Welcome to another episode of the Sports as a Weapon podcast, a Chicano sports podcast on the entanglement of sports, radical politics, and working class sports fan culture. And don't worry, we talk about just sports too. And today we're also just going to go deep on a little just politics too that doesn't even involve sports. Sports as a Weapon, if you didn't know, is part of the ANTICONQUISTA Media Collective network. ANTICONQUISTA is an anti-imperialist media collective. Our content is produced by and for the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. We are dedicated to exposing and fighting the capitalist imperialist system, the root cause of our displacement. Subscribe to the Anticonquista Patreon at patreon.com/Anticonquista and follow Anticonquista on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, be sure to listen to our podcast. Listen, subscribe, follow to the Sports as a Weapon podcast on all the major platforms, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can check us out on social media as well. X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Most active on X and Twitter. I also created a Blue Sky account. So if you want to follow us on there, it's all Sports as a Weapon or Sports as a Weapon podcast. But you'll know that in the show notes as usual. All right. We're finally back. It's been a long time since I've done an episode. I think over a year. I think it was last August 2024 when I did an episode. And then the last 2 years, I just haven't done too many. Been busy with life. I'm a dad now. My son's already 1 year old. He's 13 months. So I've been busy with that. I could have probably done some more episodes sooner like I was planning, but get busy, don't do it. Get a little complacent, busy with life. But finally, we're here, and I'm glad my next guest is joining us for this first new episode in a long time. And he's been a comrade, friend, and a follower of our podcast for a while. Welcome to the podcast, Naji Ali. He is a coach, swimming coach in the Bay Area. He used to have a podcast called Crossing the Lane Line. When you were on our friends, the End of Sport podcast, that's how I heard about you. And that's how we connected a while ago. So thank you for coming to the podcast. You could explain, give yourself a little intro, Naji.
Well, first of all, Miguel, thanks so much for all that you've done, man. It's really an honor to be on the show. And congratulations on becoming a dad. I know you're going to make a great father. Hopefully, your son will end up being a swimmer and hopefully on my team. So that's my goal.
Well, we don't live that far from you, so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, to go ahead and introduce myself, yeah, I am a swim coach. I've been coaching swimming now for close to 20 years. I coach at Oakland Tech High School here in Oakland, California, where I live with my wife and my cat. And I also am a USA swim coach with a team in Menlo Park in the community of Bellhaven. And unlike most swim clubs around the country, mine's is specifically geared towards people who live in East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Bellhaven. And most of the people that are in those neighborhoods tend to be Black and brown. I'd say out of the 22 kids I have on my team, 19 are Latino or African American. So They are in the dominant group. Great bunch of kids. Their parents are fantastic. We have a lot of fun. They're doing great in the sport. And yeah, that's who I am.
Thank you for that introduction. I used to live in the Bay in San Jose. That's how I ended up in Northern California. So near Menlo Park. Menlo Park is, people usually know about it because that's where Facebook headquarters is at, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's not just Facebook. The whole South Bay of the Bay Area has always been a big immigrant and Latino community. I know when I was in San Jose, East Side San Jose is pretty big. Also a lot of different Asian ethnicities around the Bay Area. And then obviously the Black community in the Bay Area itself, like Oakland and San Francisco. Well, we used to have a big one in San Francisco. Right now it got gentrified.
Right.
And then you said you coach at Oakland Tech. Isn't that where Marshawn Lynch went to high school?
Marshawn Lynch and the late, God rest his soul, Ricky Henderson went there as well. So,
oh yeah, Ricky Henderson. One of my all-time favorite baseball players growing up.
Exactly. Yeah, they had some heavy hitters.
He played forever, so like I was even able to watch him, and he even played for my favorite team, the Dodgers. So I think that was the last team he played for.
You're still my boy, even though I'm a Giants fan, although we're not doing it.
All right, so it's glad to be back, Naji. So let's get to it. Can you talk about your work as a swim coach in the community, and then also talk about your specific like swim training and experience as a swimmer?
Right. Yeah, great question. Well, specifically about my start in swimming, I grew up in San Diego, in specifically in the heart of San Diego, in a place called Kearny Mesa, and more specifically in an area called Linda Vista, which is, at least when I was growing up there, I was, grew up in a military family. My father was in the Navy, although he wasn't really around much. But our area was mostly Black, Latino, and Filipino. Most of us,
Okay.
all of our parents were, at least our dads, more than likely, were in the military. So there was a small pool in our neighborhood where I lived, and it was open year round. But really, back then in the late 70s, early 80s, there wasn't really a lot of people who maintained it. It was kind of rough looking, very small. I went back there recently to take a look at it, and I think my bathtub is bigger, but every summer, 9 million of us would be in that pool horsing around and just like, doing cannonballs, chicken fights, what kids normally do. And none of us had any idea that swim teams were possible. We had no idea that those things even existed, or even that swimming was technically a sport. We just looked at it as just a place to horse around. But as I got older, I found out about that. And I'd always wanted to, to try it out and stuff like that. I knew how to swim, but I wasn't really good. And my turning point was when I was about 13, and like so many, kids of color, by that time I was working, having a part-time job during the summer. I was working at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and I got the chance to work with a marine biologist, really nice guy, taught me a lot about marine biology. And one day we were going to go out into the ocean to try to capture albacore tuna to bring it back in captivity. Up until that time, it had never been done. And so I was on the boat, and we were like 20 miles off the coast of San Diego. And it was a really hot day, I remember. It was very hot. It was very flat that far out. And once they had caught a couple of the tuna and put them in these special tanks that they had designed for this purpose, one of the crew members said, "I'm going to go for a swim." So he stripped down to his trunks and he jumps in the water. And I just couldn't believe that. This guy's swimming out there in open water. You can't see the bottom. You don't know how deep it is. And he's swimming around doing freestyle and breaststroke and backstroke and butterfly. And he gets back on the boat and he's drying off. And I come up to him. I says, "Oh, man, that was so cool. I'm wondering if you could teach me that." And the guy puts his arm around me and he laughs and he says, "Kid, Black people don't swim." And everybody on that boat laughed. And I remember I was just like kind of stunned, and I walked off on my own. And I always vowed, I says, "I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to learn this, and I'm going to get better at it. And I'm going to make sure that Black and brown people, whoever wants to learn how to swim, can swim." And I didn't really have an opportunity to do that because it was so expensive. And finally, when I was an adult, and mind you, I still knew how to swim, but just didn't have any great ability, I got a chance to take a workshop, which I'd saved up money for. It was by a man named Terry Laughlin, and he is the founder of Total Immersion Swimming. And I went to one of these workshops. This was back in the early 2000s. I can't remember the time now, but I took it from his daughter, Fiona, who's a very dear friend of mine and is an amazing swim coach herself. And from that moment forward, I wanted to try to make sure that anybody who was either Black, Latino, low income, Asian, South Asian, whatever, who wanted to learn how to swim, I would teach you. And for those who were more affluent, I said, "Okay, I will teach you as well for free, but you have to sponsor someone in order for me to teach you." And so people started doing that. It was just all ad hoc, I knew guards at pools, and, I made deals with them, slim a little money here, whatever, and stuff like that, or went off to this side and did what I needed to do. And I wanted to try to do more of this, only in a more organized fashion. So I had two cats that I knew in San Francisco. One was his brother named Ron Chisholm, who I tried to hook up with to try to make this happen. And then there was another guy named Tony Soto. That's right. His name was Tony Soto.
Okay.
we tried to make something happen, and we tried to work for the city, and nothing could happen. And all we were trying to do was make a club program for kids to learn the solid foundation of swimming, and then be able to like have a team where we could compete and go up against people. And, our focus was all Black and brown kids. And so we were in Hunters Point, what was left of the mission that hadn't been gentrified, as you said, and giving these opportunities for whatever anybody could afford. Whether you had the money or not, you could go ahead and join the team. This didn't happen because the city just dragged its feet. So for a long time, fast forward, I didn't have that opportunity. And then I met a guy in Utah who grew up down in the peninsula here in the Bay Area named Matt Finnegan. And we met through COVID, during the COVID times on Facebook.
Okay, so this wasn't too long ago. Okay.
Yeah, not too long ago. And, we were with some other coaches talking about, how we were going to try to make things happen. And so he and I could identify, because we were looking at this from a standpoint of, economics. We knew that most kids who look like you and I couldn't afford this. Parents couldn't afford it. And I kept on saying in these groups, this is great. You guys are talking about, this kid is going to elite tournaments. These kids are going to these elite championships. And I said, yeah, but none of these kids look like me, or none of these kids look like Miguel. I said, there's got to be kids out there with that kind of talent who could do that. I says, why aren't we trying to focus on them? So, oh no, we have some Black and brown kids. I says, 2 don't count. I said, not when you have 300 and you've got 2. I said, do you know how alienating that is? And people just couldn't get it, but Matt did. And Matt and I connected on that, and we started making this happen. He actually already had a program set up in Utah on the west side in Salt Lake City, which was mostly Latino. I didn't know that a large portion of the west side of Salt Lake City was mostly Latino. I had no idea.
Even I didn't know that.
Exactly.
But it is kind of interesting. I have, throughout the years of my life, I've met a lot of Latinos that, I guess, they were Mormon. So that was that tripped me out, because they're used to just white people being Mormon.
Exactly.
And if not, they're either like maybe Asian or like Polynesian or something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So maybe, I don't know if these specific, because again, the Utah's the Southwest, right?
Right. Exactly.
If they're probably likely Mexican, their ancestors have been there before the settlers. So could also just be that, but I would also not be, I guess, shocked. I don't know this, but maybe they're also Mormons. But
I mean, I've never asked about religious affiliation, but it's mostly and it's a dilapidated section of the town. It's kind of the equivalent of being in East Oakland or low income areas in Sacramento or whatever, and stuff just forgotten where the affluent areas are. And of course, that's where they always drop us. But he had already had this program set up. He and his wife had started it 11 years ago. And he always wanted to try to bring it back to the Bay Area, And so we tried here. We first tried here in Oakland, but it didn't work. We almost had it done. And then the city of Oakland kind of just said, no, you can't do it at the last second, like 3 months before we were supposed to get started, which just really made me, depressed. And I was just downtrodden. And I kind of backed away. I guess my dream of having my own club is never going to work the way I want it to work. And suddenly, about 9 months later, Matt texted me and he says, hey, I found a pool in East Palo Alto, and it's just been refurbished. And ironically, it's right behind Facebook. Facebook donated the money for it to be rebuilt, which is the Bellhaven pool.
Okay, so it's an EPA. All right.
In EPA. And when he told me that, I says, that's great, Matt, but I don't know anything about East Palo Alto. That is a long trek from Oakland, And he says, yeah, I know, but maybe you can help me find some. And so we tried, but we couldn't find anybody. We were both committed that it had to be a person of color, more than likely either Black or Latino. Couldn't be some white person running it. We were adamantly opposed to that. But there was no one available who wanted to take on, starting a new club. And it was getting to the point where we were about to lose the pool because, we weren't operating. And so I just said, I said, hey, listen, Matt, I got an idea. I'm going to call you back in like 3 hours. I need to call my wife, who was at the time back in Cleveland visiting family. And I talked to my wife, Chrissy, and I said, listen, you know what I want, but if you say no, I won't do it. But there's an opportunity to do to create a club down in East Palo Alto. I'll figure out the transportation because I don't own a car. So I knew I'd have to do BART and train. But, I'll figure it out. And I said, but I won't do it if you're not on board. And she said, I'm behind you 100%. Let's do this. So I called him back. I said, okay, I'm in. And, I started back on November 5th of last year with like 6 kids. None of them were really skilled in competitive swimming, some of them knew some swimming, but weren't that great. And I said,
what age are these kids? Like age range?
Those kids, the eldest at that time he was 15, Ethan. Okay. My one of my captains was 15, and then the youngest was 12 at the time. Now all of them are like between 13 and 16 years old.
Okay.
But they were the first 6, and it was just us. I would come down 4 days a week and would work, and I would just drill them into fundamentals and try to get some stuff going. And my goal was to have them ready for a meet, their first USA official meet in March. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I was just praying, that things would go well, and, got them ready and let them know this could get you disqualified. You have to do this, good sportsmanship, whatever, always have fun. I says, and one of the things that I emphasized is I will never, ever get angry at you no matter what. I says, I never yell. I don't throw things. God knows there's plenty of swim coaches out there that do that nonsense. I'm not one of them. But I will push you. I will push you to be the best person that you can be. I am not just teaching you swimming. I'm teaching you life lessons about accountability, showing up, community, responsibility, all these different things. And come their first meet, the times that I was recording in practice dramatically dropped. And I went off, Miguel. I was just going crazy. I mean, if I could send you some of the old video, you can hear my voice over everyone else just screaming and cheering for my girls and boys to do well. And they did great. And now since that time, we've grown from 6 swimmers to 22 because of word of mouth. And that was the other part of my team. I would go to churches, community centers, middle schools, elementary schools, and just talk with everybody who was willing to listen to me. And I gave out flyers, and I just beat the pavement every single day that I was down there before practice. And then I would go to practice, and then after practice, I would do it again, just to emphasize. Now it's to the point when I'm going by like one of my favorite taquerias or some other place, everyone would say, hey, Coach Naji, how are you doing? Say, and it's really great to see that. Sometimes there's this old abuela. She comes by sometimes to the community center, and when she does, she always makes a detour, and she sets down this food. And I said, I can't eat all this food. Said, no, you have to eat all this food and stuff like that. You're doing the good things for our community and our kids and stuff like that. You have to eat all this food, take it home for you, and it's just great, to have that kind of community type feel. And, I'm really excited, with this club. I'm really excited for the kids that are there. And like I said, it's geared towards those who live in those communities. And now I'm getting, people from Menlo Atherton who are saying, oh, well, can I join? I said, sorry. I said, you have to be from this area. I said, this is specifically for kids in these areas because they don't have anything. It's really underappreciated. And that's what makes me most proud is that we're doing it and it's making an impact.
I'm going to have to go visit you, and see this one of these days.
Get down there.
How does club swimming work? Is it just kind of like the other club sports?
Yeah, in the sense, club swimming is just like other sports, you have meets. For us, all of our meets are under what is the governing body of the USA Swimming. These are the guys who are responsible for the Olympics.
Well, that's the governing body you had to be under pretty much. Okay.
Exactly, for us to compete.
Okay.
Yeah. And I have major issues with them. I always have. I've openly said that there is a ton of racism. There is a lot of discrimination that goes on. It's a known fact that there has been a lot of sexual assault that's been swept under the rug.
That's what I was going to mention. I remember hearing about that and talking about that a little bit with our friends at the end of sport, specifically Johanna.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that. And so if people don't know, you could always Google this, just USA Swimming and sexual misconduct, assault, all these things. There's a lot out there. Crazy. A lot of people won't even know about it.
Yeah, it's really bad. And what happens is in this sport, oftentimes when someone is legitimately being accused of this. I hate to make this analogy. It's kind of like the Catholic Church. They just funnel you off to some other place. You go from one club to the next and it starts all over again. And the funny thing is, even if you do get the ban from USA Swimming, and some people have been banned, there's some horrible, horrible perpetrators of sexual violence in the sport, mostly men. You can go and coach at what's called U.S. Masters Swimming, which I also am a head coach of U.S. Masters. And they don't coordinate with each other. They don't look at.
So they're like two separate bodies here in the United States when it comes to swimming.
Exactly. And, one hand, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So say, for instance, there's credible belief that Coach Bob has committed sexual assault in USA Swimming. He'll just go to Masters, and then maybe in some other state, and they don't know. And all of a sudden he starts his grooming pattern all over again. And it's really disturbing how that works. And I think that there needs to be that collaboration to really shut that down, because we're talking about, number one, kids' lives in USA Swimming, and maybe a vulnerable adult in US Masters or what have you. So it's really disturbing to see that there's an organization called Safe Sport that, is supposed to monitor what's going on in USA Swimming. I think they're an absolute joke. There has been a number of very credible times where people have said, this happened. We have evidence of this and this and this. And they, start doing their investigations. And because that might be a very prominent coach or someone who has, some connections, it gets glossed over. They get a slap on the wrist, if that, or they get shuffled along someplace else. And the police aren't involved some of the time. I've always said, if I even suspect that coach whoever is doing whatever, I'm going to let someone know, because that's what you should do. Even if it's wrong, you'll say, hey, listen, we just had to make sure. I'd rather do that and have someone say, oh, okay, I don't want to work here anymore, than have let it go, knowing that I suspected something, and then, something happens to a child. I don't know how people live with themselves on that.
One that did get a lot of media attention, this was the college athlete near where you coach, was Brock Turner? What was his name?
Yeah, Brock Turner at Stanford.
From Stanford, which is Palo Alto, next door to East Palo Alto.
Oh, yeah. And, he was like, of course, he has such a good future ahead of him. Would you have said that if the person who assaulted this woman was Black or Latino? Do you honestly think that they would have said that? I don't think so. I think they would have been under the jail 2 minutes after it happened. But yet, because he's this clean-cut, wholesome-looking young white man, oh, well, that's all right. And this is my frustration with USA Swimming a lot, is that, it's an old boys network, number one. There's hardly any head coaches who are women. But number two, it's also predominantly white, for obvious reasons. Their economics are a lot better than ours, and they have more access. Miguel, it's hard for kids when they're on teams, when they look like you and I, to be surrounded by people who don't look like us. And you and I have had to do that for most of our lives, because we're old enough that that's just the reality.
People don't even understand, I'm a lighter skinned Mexican, and I still get, I just remember, something that always comes back to me in a memory. I was in high school. I go to the movie theaters with my friends. The movie theater we went to is in another town bar close to where I grew up in Southern California in the Inland Empire, Redlands, California. And Redlands, California is mixed Latino and majority white, especially certain areas. And I remember going into it was a Cold Stone ice cream shop. One of the first times, maybe the second time I ever walked into one of them. This is the early 2000s, and nobody said anything racist, but everybody in there was white except me and my friend. And it's always weird. You could feel it. There's always somebody in there that's probably oh, where are these Mexicans walking in? Not that everybody's thinking that, but you always feel it. That you're the only person that isn't white there. Because
we have to be on guard.
It was an instinct too. It was weird. I didn't even think about it. It just right away, I noticed it right away. And that's when I'm in high school. Back then, I wasn't even as radical politically conscious as I am now. I would just say I was just a normal Latino liberal kid at that time, right?
Well, I mean, we'll look at it this way, and I've told many of my white friends when they've asked about these kinds of questions, I says, when we're growing up, when we're given the talk, it's not about sex, it's about the cops and how that we're going to interact with the cops. I says that's our talk from if you're from a black family or from a Latino family. I says that's one of the first talks that you get because you have to know how to conduct yourself when that happens. And like you said, you go into these places, whether you're conscious of it, like you and I are now or not, but when you're at a store, the store detectives following you from that distance, or some store employee is like looking at you, thinking that you don't have the money to pay for something.
Or you're at a store and like another customer thinks you're the employee just because the way you.
Exactly.
Does that happen?
Exactly. I mean, that happens all the time. Oh, are you the help? I was like,
I'm like,
no,
oh man.
no, I'm here to buy money. So you look more like the help than me. But that's how deeply that is set into our culture,
Yep.
and that's not a slam on you and I because that's what we had to do to survive. But it is in terms of the context of how this society works. I remember when people would say, hey, listen, when you're thinking about a lawyer, a pilot of a plane, or some CEO, what do you think about? And almost universally, you're thinking white. But if you're thinking like janitor, gardener, store clerk, it's either black or brown most of the time. That's how you think about it. And that's how we get conditioned. And to me, that happens a lot within swimming. It's just like, oh, you're black or you're Latino, you swim? You don't play soccer? You don't play basketball? You play this? And it's like, I can't do both.
Yeah, no.
Or I can do this and do it better than you.
Exactly. And I think that's going to kind of, because Sway can get us into this next question. You kind of already talked about it, but what are these? Like, what is the history of white supremacy with swimming a little bit? Can you talk about that? You've talked about it on your podcast, because that's it. Like, they're like, oh, you're black, you're brown, you're a swimmer. Like, nobody expects that because these worlds are particularly white, like other sports like golf or tennis, very white and wealthy demographic when it comes to who plays those sports or who has the money to really participate in those sports.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great question, Miguel. So just to tie it down as quick as I could, for your readers, there's 2 books, if ever they wanted to check out, that I'd recommend with regards to these whole issues. The first is Contested Waters, a social history of swimming in America by a good friend of mine's, Professor Jeff Wiltsey. He teaches at the University of Montana. And he goes into great detail about the segregation of pools, over the course of time. Now, back when we first started having pools or baths, as they were called, when they first started in this country, it was mostly for people like us, before we can get clean. We didn't have indoor plumbing probably at that time. So, they started designing these things for people could have some place to like clean themselves up before we had to go to the white section of town to work and do whatever we needed. Over time, they started developing these pools, and especially after, I think during FDR's New Deal, they started developing these massive pools all over the country. And the biggest, ironically, was here in San Francisco, Fleischhacker Pool, which is like 1,000 feet long.
Whoa.
And guards had to be in rowboats. The lifeguards had to be in rowboats to monitor it. It was crazy. And it was right down where the zoo is now. That's where it was located.
Where the San Francisco Zoo. So that pool is no longer there.
Yeah, it's been gone.
There now. Okay.
I think it's like since the maybe very early 70s, it was finally torn down.
I'm gonna ask my uncle who's from San Francisco. He's a white dude, but he's Italian white dude from San Francisco. I wonder if he remembers that pool.
He very well might. Yeah, he very well might. So, you have these pools, and, a lot of the pools initially were located in urban areas and people were allowed to come. But as the bathing suits started changing, especially for women, when they started getting smaller.
Oh, yeah. I remember like reading or seeing some documentary about like how they try to like, when they started sexualizing that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, people like us are coming there, especially men. Oh, well, they're going to go ahead and just get all riled up and start, assaulting the women or what have you. So we got to make sure that they can't get in. Now, for a while, they didn't have anything necessarily on the books doing this. But what they did have was the community who would block us from getting into the pools. And, like places like, St. Louis and other places, there are near riots trying to keep people out, physically assaulting Black and brown people who are trying to get in to these pools. And one thing that I found when I was doing this reading, and you may not know about this or you might, but eventually they gave one day for Black, Latino, Native American, Asian American people to go and swim. That was Thursday, mostly around the country. In most places, it was Thursday. Here's the ironic thing, Miguel. This was back before filtration, before they have all the high-tech stuff at the pools now that can keep it nice and clean and beautiful. They would have it on a Monday, all the whites would come. On a Tuesday, the whites would come. On a Wednesday, the whites would come. And by that Wednesday or so, I'm starting from Friday through Wednesday, they would come. And the pool got dirtier and dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. And then on Thursday, we were allowed to get in. Now, can you imagine how much gross stuff that must be in that pool at that time? And that's where we're allowed to swim. And then right after we're done, they immediately drain the pool and then put in fresh water. So we had to swim through all of this garbage while they had a nicer.
And then what day would they let the people usually swim? Do you know? Was it like the end of the week or something?
Yeah.
I don't know if I heard you say that.
Thursdays. I had heard mostly Thursdays.
Okay.
It was called International Day. It was whatever day it was always called International Day.
Racist, even though they really don't think it is, but it is.
Exactly. And that was really something. So a lot of this stuff is documented in that book, Contested Waters, The Social History of Swimming Pools in America. And there's another really great book called Undercurrents of Power, Aquatic History in the African Diaspora, which was written by Dr. Kevin Dawson. And this book, and I'll make this really quick, talked about roughly from 1445 to 1865, predominantly, but not exclusively, Blacks were the greatest swimmers and all. A lot of Native Americans and indigenous people also were really proficient swimmers, because most of us back in those days, if you were poor, you lived mostly towards the water. That's where you lived. They wanted you out of sight, out of mind, where they had all of this, urban areas for themselves in order to build up their urbanization. So
they decided to go to the suburbs and make us go to the... Exactly.
And so, because we were around the water so much, you had to. That was your survival. You had to make your living out there. That's where, if you wanted food, you had to go in and get the fish to get it out and what have you. So from at least, and I'm just speaking solely from the African perspective, in most of West Africa, kids were swimming by the time they were weaned. We're talking 6 months they're in the water. By 4 or 5, they're proficient. Everybody thinks that surfing began or was founded in Hawaii. Sorry, it came there 200 years after it was founded in Ghana. That's why I hate that, racist movie Endless Summer, where they're showing the Africans how to surf. These people, they have their own boards and everything. They don't need you to show them how to surf. But, this is history that is not known to most people. Mm-hmm. And in our communities as well, both Black and Latino, we don't know about this history. One last thing, there was a book that a friend of mine's, this picture book that a friend of mine's, Bruce Weigel, who used to be the head of USA water polo, was showing in a video. And he's showing these indigenous people swimming in this river. And you can see they have their high elbow, getting their water out for recovery, going along doing freestyle, or the crawl stroke, it was called. He says the only difference, though, between this indigenous person doing that stroke and a crawl stroke is that the crawl stroke had not been invented yet and wouldn't be invented yet for another 200 years. And this was from a European drawing, that making the drawing and making this assessment that he's watching these indigenous people do this. But yet Australia and America get credit for all of this. White Australia and white America get credit for all of this. Whereas we're the ones who came up with it. We're the ones who came up with it, not them. And so this is how people who talk about swimming think, oh, well, Black people and brown people don't swim. And I used to listen to that all the time. And I'd say, I'll tell you what, you might swim. Your kids might swim. Heck, your grandparents might swim. And possibly your great grandparents. But then it stops for you. For us, you can go back from great grandparents, just keep going. You got centuries before you'd find someone who is not black or brown who didn't know how to swim. We carried that for so long. And over time, because as you said about discrimination, about marginalization, moving us, from the more, what started becoming more, luxurious areas into the more urban and poorer areas, they had the access and we didn't. So we literally had it beaten, drowned, and restricted from us from knowing how to swim. It's not that we didn't know. It's not that we don't have history on it. We have a farther history than white people do. But that's how it's perceived now. And so, yes, do still a high majority of people in our communities don't know how to swim? Of course they don't. But it's not because of want of trying and wanting to do it and being able to do it extremely well when they get that opportunity. But because the economics, because of still that, like you said, when you're going into that store, they may not be saying it overtly, but trust me, even a 5 and 6 and 8-year-old kid who's black or brown knows what they're feeling. They know they're out of place. They know they're looking around and says, hey, nobody here that looks like me. And that is the way that it is now. And granted, land sports get the most popularity. You get soccer, you get basketball, you get baseball, football, and those are great sports. But I've always said, I'm still willing to give someone all of my savings if you can prove to me that if I don't know how to, that if I don't learn how to play basketball, baseball, football, soccer, whatever, I'm going to die. It's only swimming. Swimming is a life skill first. It is a sport second.
Yep. That's a good point. Very good point to point out.
And I always tell people, I says, don't want to die playing basketball? Okay, I don't play basketball. He says, don't want to die playing football? Granted, okay, I'll never get out there in the field. I can avoid those easily. You can't avoid water. The world is 75% water. And even if you live in Iowa or some other place where it's not where you and I are on the coast, you still got rivers, you still got floods.
I'm here in Sacramento. There's a lot of rivers, and apparently if it ever gets very bad, it could be like a Katrina over here.
Exactly.
Flooding.
Exactly. And you need to understand how to take care of yourself with that. That's why I've always said, I will teach anybody to swim, regardless of ability to pay, because it is a life sport. That's like denying you food. That is like denying you water if you need to drink. And so if you can't do that, you need this to survive. It's a life skill.
Might have to take my son to you.
Hey, he's more than welcome. He's more than welcome. More than welcome. Free of charge.
Thank you for breaking that down, because a lot of people don't know just that, there's a lot more to talk about on that subject, but that was a very good summary of the history of it a little bit. Discrimination. I know it made me think of something my dad told me, like, he used to like to do. So he was born in the U.S., but quickly went back to Mexico with his family because my grandpa was in the Bracero program. Mm-hmm. So my dad, both my mom and dad were born in the same place, like in the Central Valley area, Hollister, closer to San Jose, I guess, than where I'm at. But because both my grandparents were in the Bracero program back in the 50s, working the fields, but then they ended up back in Mexico. But when my dad's family moved back to the U.S., moved to where I grew up, Colton, California, in Southern California, near Riverside, San Bernardino. But he was in South Colton, and South Colton's always been, that's where all the Mexicans lived. And that's where the biggest Mexican population. Now Colton is a majority, I would say, still Mexican overall. But at that time, the south side of Colton, that's where all the Mexicans live. So my dad lived there, and I know the swimming pool, at least, I don't know if it was around when at that time, but I'm thinking it was the community pool. That's on the north side. So my dad didn't go to a pool. He always talks about going to a canal and like swimming with his brothers. Like, he didn't go to a swimming pool. That's just one example from my own family, like, of that segregation, of swimming.
No, absolutely. And that happens all the time, all over the country. USA Swimming and all the rest of those guys will say, we are diverse. We are open to anybody. I says, well, tell me something. How am I going to get transportation from where I live way over onto the other side of the city to go to swim practice? Are you going to pay for my swimsuit? Are you going to pay for my fins? Are you going to pay for my tempo trainer? Are you going to pay for my pull buoy? Are you going to pay for my paddles? This stuff costs a lot of money, Miguel, and I know how to find the bargains in this sport. I can find them. I have connections where I will wheel and deal to try to get things for my kids, but it's expensive. Even for my kids at first, that was one of the things that I demanded that Matt and I both do. I said, listen, I will find the equipment for my kids if I have to buy it myself, because I know how much it costs. And a good 60% of the kids who are on my team are outreach kids, meaning that they can't even pay the full amount for number one, the tuition dues or for USA Swimming. And so I said, I have no choice but to do that. You see, this is the problem. It's such an expensive sport. I mean, club sports, as you know, are expensive. It doesn't matter if it's basketball, baseball, whatever. They're expensive. And that's not even talking about the travel costs and all these other things. And, you know, doing it year round, that takes a toll on you as a family financially. It really does. And I've always felt, you know, you're pricing people out. You've always priced people out of this. And, you know, it's not surprising that, you know, your uncle's having to swim in a canal or something like that. I'm not surprised at that at all. You know, that happens all the time in our communities. You know, like I said before, that's how we bathed, was going down to the river. And even then, we had to stay in a certain section of the river because if white people saw us drifting over to there, and it's happened before, they would stone us, they would drown us, they would beat us, all these things.
So next, been a good conversation. So I want to talk real quick. Can you discuss like your experience in occupied Palestine? Like you actually were over there before in the past.
Sure.
And then maybe talk a little bit about this genocide still going on almost 2 years. My last 3 episodes, I pretty much talked about it.
Well, yeah, I appreciate this question, Miguel. And by the way, I've always appreciated your stance on this because you're right. First of all, it is a genocide. It's not a war. It's a genocide. Yeah, I lived in Palestine from 2002 through 2005 during the Second Intifada. I actually do have family in Palestine, in Gaza. I have someone who's very dear to me. He's not a blood relative, but he's basically a brother in a lot of ways. His name's Muhammad, and he was originally from Khan Yunis, but obviously has been completely displaced. He's a testament to what we call, the Arabic word is samud, which is steadfastness. And, you know, he said, I want this carnage, this nightmare to end, but I'm not going to bow to anybody. I'm not going to bow to anyone whatsoever. And he remains steadfast, you know, to this day. And I haven't heard from him today because the internet probably isn't working at the moment, but I'm sure I will try to send him money each month, at least $300 or so a month. You know, I don't have that money, but, you know, I have more than he does. So I have to send him something. With regards to all of this, I want to use this in the context of sports just real quick. I've had issues, obviously, with Zionist Israel for decades. For decades, I've had issues with them. And myself and a mutual friend of ours, Dave Ziner, have talked about this many times in the past. And I brought up the fact that, you know, South Africa was blacklisted in sports. You know, they couldn't leave South Africa and play internationally. Not with FIFA, not with FINA, not with, FIBA, none of them. You know, the Davis Cup, nothing. They weren't allowed to go to anything. And, you know, even people who went to South Africa on the invitation of the Sports Federation there to play were also heavily penalized for doing that. And I think the same thing needs to happen with Israel. I don't think that they should be allowed to go to the Olympics. I don't think that they should be allowed to participate in the World Cup. I don't think they should be allowed to, you know, to compete in any of the international governing body of swimming is FINA, FINA, and as well as any other international competition. Now, a lot of my friends always say, well, why don't you go ahead and just realize this is, you know, who cares about, you know, whether they can play in that or not? And I listen to these arguments, you know, will it do any good? And I says, you know what? I really think it will. And this is my reasoning for it. More intellectuals can explain it in a better way. But as you and I both know, Miguel, a lot of people don't pay attention to the news. Matter of fact, they'll just like tune out for the news 90% of the time. However, people are on their phones a lot. You know, I mean, I know you've been annoyed like I have when a person's just like, you know, walking along, not looking up where they're going. And you're just like right in front of them says, I'm right here, please, just for 2 seconds. And this coincides with what all these actors recently have signed on to that letter saying that they are not going to participate with any Israeli company, you know, in the arts that is, you know, endorsing this genocide. I think that people do get very interested when they don't have access to their movies, to their television shows, to their famous singers, and especially to their sports. That's when people start paying attention. Your leisure activities are being taken away. Oh, what's going on? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Why aren't we allowed to to go to this? That sends a message. That was a big thing with ending apartheid in South Africa. Was that cultural boycott? That was huge. That gets your attention really fast. Politics, yeah, people will barely even take a glance at that. But sport, the arts, music, culture, oh wow, that's drawing a red line. We need to stop this henceforth. And I don't know if I ever told you, I lived in South Africa from 1990 through 95, just after Nelson Mandela was released. So I got to watch the tail end of apartheid and to see that and to see that impact that it had. And I know for a fact that it works. And I'm sure that our government and other European governments know it works. And that's why they're fighting so hard not to make it happen. Why isn't FIFA saying anything after all of this? How many Palestinian footballers have been killed? How many?
So many. Even Palestinian baseball players, like,
exactly.
As I follow the Palestinian baseball team, which a lot are Palestinian Americans and stuff on the team, but some of them actually are from Palestine and live there.
Exactly. You have that. There was a friend of mine. He lived in Gaza City, and his name is Ahmed Tantesh, and he and I were going to do a open water swim clinic down in Gaza. An open water marathon swim clinic, because I used to be a marathon swimmer myself, and I was so excited about that. And we were literally planning that, I'd say like 2 months before October 7th. And then when I saw it, I was like, okay, there goes that. There's absolutely no chance that's going to happen anytime soon. And I, at the time I was thinking, maybe it'll just, we'll get set back 4 or 5 months and then we'll get it going. Well, 2 years later.
Because I remember, was it like last time I remember there was something big that happened was in 2014 when Israel, and that's when people know the former NBA player Dwight Howard tweeted like something positive about support of Gaza, and they made him delete it. And now he's actually talks about it. There's a clip online of him talking. The NBA literally called him and made him delete the tweet. This is exactly. In 2014.
Yeah. And it's no coincidence that these major, sports organizations here in the States really try to suppress you. Hats off to Kyrie, who has consistently...
he's still going. He's been consistent.
Has consistently been on the side of the Palestinians. And, I keep on wondering, LeBron, when are you going to open your mouth? Steph, when are you going to open your mouth? You'll say some stuff about Black lives. That's great, and being opposed to what ICE is doing. But this is just as critical. It's all interwoven. Mm-hmm. And for me, especially as, both of us being, avid sports people, when you see what's happening in the Congo or Sudan or Palestine or any other place, or what's happening with the ICE stuff, they're rounding up athletes there too.
Mm-hmm.
They're rounding up really good athletes there too, and it's all interwoven. And you need to understand that from the capitalistic standpoint, we're just kind of the amusement. We're the help, well-paid help on occasions, but the help nonetheless. We can sing, we can dance, we can do this. We can play baseball, we can play football, we can play soccer and swim. But as soon as we step out of line and stand up for the marginalized and the oppressed, silence, or we're gone.
It's that shut up or dribble that, what's her name? Laura Ingraham or whatever her name
exactly.
is. Yeah, from Fox News told LeBron a few years ago.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm like, fuck you and stuff like that. I'll say what I want.
Mm-hmm.
If that's your attitude, this is what I'm going to say back to you, because I'm not backing down on this. I openly have said this is some people in USA Swimming know. I says, I'm not going to make any bones about it. So I'm a socialist swim coach. I'm very proud of that. I am very proud of that. I will always be on the side of the oppressed and the poor and the marginalized. Always. I have no problem. And if you want to bounce me out of here, fine. Go ahead and do that. I'm still a good coach. I've still got people who respect me. That doesn't really bother me. I'm still good at this. I says, I can still trade great technique. People know that I can do that. So I'm not worried about that. I'm not making money off this. What are you going to ruin me financially? For what? You know, I said, I get reimbursed for a monthly train ticket to do my job. That's what I get. And I agreed to that. So you're not hurting me financially. You're really not. But I'm always going to stand up and I'm always going to say what I have to say. And, for me, this is the right thing to do. We need to go ahead and have a worldwide cultural ban on Israel. We need to do our part. We need to push harder on that. And I know you and I have, and I know people like Dave Zirin and Kyrie and others are really working at it. But it really needs to be. I commend, the Irish women's basketball team. They wouldn't shake hands with the Israelis. Good for you. People are saying, well, they're sports people. So yeah, they're also in the IDF. It's a civilian army. So they're automatically a part of that.
There was Euro basketball tournament that just happened in Israel's not in occupied Palestine is not in Europe.
Exactly.
But guess who they put them with? They play in the Euro League tournament because we all know that's what they really are. Is they're settlers and European.
There's no denying that.
They put them in the Eurovision contest. Like
it's laughable to me when people get so bent out of shape and says, "Well, I'm native to America." I said, "No, you're not. You're native to Europe." I said, unless you're Latino or a Native American, you're not indigenous to America. I'm sorry, you're not. I can't honestly say that because I didn't choose to come here. I was dragged here, I was fine where I was. And if you say, oh, go back to where it came from, if we did, this country would fall apart in seconds, less than like a couple of months. If all of us left, it would literally fall apart. And that's the thing. People don't understand. At this point, we need to be communal about this. We need to really, that allyship, if nothing else, with the global South, we all need to band together because there's more of us.
Yep, there's way more of us. They know those in power, the white supremacists in power, they know those capitalist white supremacists, they know they're outnumbered.
Absolutely. And, we're starting to see that with these younger generations. And I'm hoping your son will look back on this when you're older and say, what the heck were you guys, thinking back then, because it would just be so obviously Looney Tunes. But, until that time, the fight continues and I'm not backing down as far as my coaching, as a coach, I says, hey, listen, everybody's here. So long as you understand that this is more than just about swimming. This is a movement that I'm trying to create where I'm, uplifting the marginalized and the oppressed. That's all I'm interested in. That's all I've ever been interested in any job I've ever taken. I worked as a social worker for nearly 20 years, with my wife. And we just dealt with the poor, homeless, and people with drug and alcohol dependency. My wife still fights for people who are facing eviction now at her current job. Those are the kind of jobs that we take. When neither of us, we both have a really strict policy. We don't accept jobs where you're whoring out for capitalism. We just won't do it. We just won't do it. People don't like that. Like I've said before, I'm not here to be liked. I'm not here to be liked. I'm not here to be a buddy. I'm not here to be a friend. I'll get over it. Don't worry about it. I got plenty of friends. I got people like you, Miguel, and others. I'm good.
Yeah, no. I remember when I was younger, it used to bother me more. Oh, they don't like me no more. Well, now, get older and more politically conscious. I'm like, you don't like it. You don't like it. Like, there's plenty of comrades and friends I'll have on my side.
That part, 100.
Yeah,
and that's the same way I feel. And I'm a middle/low income, person who's living here in Oakland, but I can wake up knowing I'm not, excuse my language, fucking somebody over. Not at my job. I never do. I mean, even the Masters team that I coach, it's the cheapest Masters team, one of the cheapest in the country. The coaching staff is highly diversified, trans people, mostly people of color. I'm the head coach. Yeah, granted, there's a lot of white people that are on the club and stuff like that. But even then, I really make them aware of things that are going on. And I try to do that as much as I can. Maybe not necessarily all the time directly to everybody, but like when I'm having conversations, I mean, I wear T-shirts that I wear, Palestine and Handala and, native rights all the time. I'm not going to change who I am just because you feel a little uncomfortable. Please feel free to be uncomfortable. That's not my problem. Maybe that's forcing you to rethink something.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I'm also not going to put up with bullshit. I'm not going to have you talking about women as objects or, the LGBTQI people, in this way or that way. Definitely not, what's going on with ICE or what's going on in Palestine and all those things, because all of this has to do, when it comes back around to me in some way with sports. I've always said that, and people say, well, how? I says, figure it out. Like I said, the cultural aspect, that's when you're going to get people's attention. They're not going to pay attention to the politics. They'll pay attention to the TV show, the song, the artwork, and the sports. Then they'll start listening. Those platforms are huge.
Yeah, and they're all connected to politics, but people don't realize that. So that's why I started a podcast like this. It's a way to tie in the politics of the sports to something that regular people don't really like to think about politics. And then they just think about it here in the U.S. They just think about it like the regular Republican Democrats, electoral type politics. But it's all tied in, and that's why a podcast like this is why I wanted to make it.
And that's why I think it's so valuable, especially
right.
from an aspect of, just like Dave Zirin, how sports and politics collide, how it's interconnected. And you're doing that step further by saying, listen, that's why I love the title of your podcast, Sports as a Weapon, because it is. It's a weapon for good of like saying, you know what? You can get a lot further on this subject with something that they love watching, and they see this person coming and saying this, what? You're going to throw them out? No, you're not. And so who are you going to get? You're not going to get somebody on this caliber for your team. You need that person. Use that. If LeBron or Steph or, Jaylen Brown or whoever it is really starts using that, it's game over. You're not just going to be able to grab another one. They're not readily available.
When the strike happened, the NBA strike in the bubble in 2020, that was maybe like my third episode when I talked about it. My third ever episode. But we remember Obama made a call to LeBron, and then the strike was over.
Yeah, please don't mention that name. Forgive my peasants and stuff.
That influence.
That's a visceral response for me. Like, it's like when I hear Obama or Richie Torres or something else like that, I'm like, ugh, it just makes me tremble. It's just...
And then we're almost going to wrap up here, and let's get to this last little topic I want to talk about.
Sure.
This happened a couple days ago. But yeah, let's talk about Charlie Kirk assassination, white supremacy, and as Malcolm X said, the chickens have come home to roost. To wrap up the podcast episode here.
Yeah, I'll make this real quick. Well, first of all, I don't condone violence. I'm not saying that he deserved to be shot. But what I am saying is I find it amazing that we're spending all this time on one average white guy who had a big platform and said all this vile stuff about Palestinians, African Americans, Latinos, everybody. And yet when he dies, everybody's saying now, oh, well, we got to mourn for him. No, I don't. I don't have to mourn for him. I don't. You said some horrible stuff. Really, really horrible stuff. Do I think you deserve to die? No, of course not. But you're the one who advocated for Second Amendment rights. You've been pushing that since the beginning, since the jump. You do the
over a decade. And that's kind of came on the scene right when Trump was about to run for president. Pretty much the beginning of this modern MAGA movement.
Absolutely. And
he's one of the ones that really built it up.
Yeah. And you say that, and then this is what happens. Once again, I'm not saying that I wanted him to get shot. I'm not saying that I'm celebrating his death. But I do find it ironic that we're focusing more on one man when we're not talking about close to 600,000, probably, I probably am lowballing it, that have died in Gaza.
Every day for 2 years. Like on social media, we've seen videos. We don't want to see them, but videos of children being blown up. Like I've seen some terrible, gruesome things I'll never forget. And then in a way, we're also desensitized to it because it's been happening for so long. But then when this happens, all these people, mostly white, not all white, that I even have on social media from high school, they're not my friends or on my friends list, whatever. But then they start out of nowhere, now they care and they comment on a post I write about because I don't want to mourn this person's death, who I pretty much consider a neo-Nazi, right? Pretty much in his ideology. But they never commented, never said anything about of Gaza or ICE or anything.
Absolutely.
If not, some of these people might even support those racist, oppressive actions, but never commented. And out of nowhere, this one white dude dies, gets killed, and now they want to talk about it. Now they want to make like comment, you know?
Right. Yeah. Your hypersensitivity about this, I mean, and I saw the video of when he got shot, the live one. And yeah, it was a terrible thing. But like you said, I've also seen videos of people holding up half the torso of their baby that was just blown apart by a missile that my tax dollars paid for. I've seen people walking along, minding their own damn business, getting blown apart by a drone strike. Right there. 1 minute they're there, and the next minute they're gone. No one says anything about that. You're right.
Or here in the U.S., all the videos we've seen of cops killing black people, like George Floyd.
Exactly. And he calls George Floyd a scumbag. So
he claimed that he died from a drug overdose, not from the knee from the cop.
Derek Chauvin, yeah.
Derek Chauvin, yeah. I was like trying to remember his name because there's so many. I was going to say Darren Wilson, Michael Brown one, like because they all have similar names.
Exactly. And yet you want us to somehow root for the oppressor and not the oppressed. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. Not in my life. It doesn't work that way. Do I think that he deserves to die? No. Do I think that he deserved to get a shot? No. Do I think that he, like you said, the chickens came home to roost? Absolutely. They did. There's no denying that. And whoever did it and something, clearly it was someone who was a professional. There's no way it's just a random shooter. That's impossible given where they said he shot it from with one shot. You're not
supposedly detained a kid. They detained a kid this morning as we're recording this. So they say, but I don't even know what to believe because
yeah, it's
they said there's writings on the casings. They're still saying, and some of them don't make sense. And then supposedly this kid they arrested, he's 22. That's literally today, right before we recorded. The dad supposedly called the feds, and the dad's a cop. And he's white, and his family's Republican. So let's say this person is not a patsy and is the person that did it. He wasn't what they all said he was going to be. All the right wingers were straight to, we got to kill the left, like they've been one.
Of course, yeah. And we both know what they're talking about when they talk about the left. It's like the center right or the marginally center left. Not people like you and I who are really on the left. Yeah, and that's always the scapegoat. Regardless of who did it, I'm just amazed at how much press he is getting simply because, number one, he's a young white male who's conservative, who had all these wild views. You're just exposing yourself for who you are when you're saying this. So it's okay for us to mourn a racist, a fascist, this type of person, but someone who is Latino, who's minding his own dang business, and is getting shot in the street. Well, you see, he was probably an illegal who's probably raped somebody or this, that. You're quick to conclude. You're quick to conclude because he doesn't have a social media platform. Or, if he's black, then he had to be a drug dealer or gangbanger or something like that. You're always quick to conclude. But someone like him, saying, oh, well, he was just a father and a concerned citizen. No, he was a fascist. There's no denying that. There's evidence on social media, like you said, going back 10 years. There's no denying it. And like I said, I'm not celebrating his death. I'm not celebrating him getting shot. I'm just pointing out the facts.
Yep, the facts. And before we go, to tie it into sports, the New York Yankees did a moment of silence that same night, September 10th, for Mr. Kirk. And then last night when I'm watching the NFL Thursday night football game, the Green Bay Packers did the same thing. I just want to point out the hypocrisy. Did they ever do this? They didn't do this for the Minnesota Democratic politicians. I don't even support Democrats, but they didn't have this outrage for two. They're literally politicians. They got gunned down by a MAGA person.
And what about the people in Evergreen, Colorado who died
the same day.
On the same day? I don't remember anybody giving a moment for silence for them.
Or other times when people got killed by the police, like George Floyd, Michael Brown, anybody. There was never a moment of silence for them.
Well, but Miguel, not to debate or anything, they do have in the end zone saying, it takes all of us.
And racism.
Whatever the heck that means.
And racism, just by writing it on the end zone.
I don't know what all of us takes, but we got that. So I guess we couldn't be too upset.
But yeah, kind of just end it there. Any last words before we end the episode? And thank you.
Yeah, I gotta, tell you, I got mad love for you, my brother, and stuff like that, and I do consider you my brother because, you have kept me going sometimes when I've been really despondent, about doom scrolling, in Instagram and
I
other
do
places.
scroll a lot too.
And, but, I think that what you're doing is great. I think really with sports, it can be this great binding thing for us, or it can be used, like you're trying to do to get someone's attention, saying, "Hey, listen, you can have it, or it can be taken away if you don't start making sure that we have a more equitable situation in this world." Because, like I said before, I'll get your attention culturally. If I can't get it politically, I'll get it. I'll get it. Culturally and through sports and other things, and we can make a better world through that.
All right, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.